Maryanne, why should someone listen to this episode of Pod Friends?
Yes, someone should listen to this episode of Pod Friends because a lot of times we go and we hear and we see and we have a typecast of one person like, oh, this is Maryanne, this is the XYZ, and this is what the definition that I've made of her from what I've seen. But now, from listening to Pod Friends, you can say, this is Maryanne, and this is Maryanne's perspective of being Maryanne, and this is her saying her story, not me watching her story.
Maryanne, you are one of a kind. You are such a gem, such an amazing person. You have so much light, so much vibrance. I am thankful, and I'm excited for people to listen to this episode of Pod Friends.
Yay!
There we go. Hello, everyone. It is Matt Scott back for another season of Pod Friends, Season 3, here coming at you with conversations, just like the theme song by Will from America says, conversations behind the mic with people from this RHAP has a podcast network community. Some people we know, some people we don't know that well, but all of them, even if we don't start the episode loving them, we walk out loving them. And that's my favorite part about Pod Friends. And I am thankful to be back for another season in this Survivor off season, coming at you with about 8 episodes over the next several weeks, all about people from this community. People like today's guest, Maryanne Oketch, people like Mike Bloom and Jessica Lees and Evie Jagoda, and more to come this season. So much coming up. I won't belabor the point or delay it, other than just to show so much love to this week's guest, Maryanne, who I'd had the pleasure of meeting a couple of times at some of the live events happening in DC, where I live. And really to spend this time having a conversation with Maryanne, who shares so much of herself so beautifully. I think the thing I love most is how efficient she is in terms of sharing her perspectives, but also how comprehensive and detailed she is in sharing her perspectives and her wisdom and her advice and her experiences and her stories. And so if you know Maryanne, you know that this is going to be a great one. So buckle up for that, and for what was really a conversation that I'm thankful for, and that kind of made my eyes well up a little bit, just with how meaningful and powerful it was. And if this conversation or any conversation from the catalog of Pod Friends resonates with you, number one, I would just invite you to leave a review for the podcast, to show some love to Pod Friends, or it doesn't need to be an either or. We don't need to work with the binary. And you can follow along at Hey Pod Friends on social media, at Matt Scott GW, and tweet me and Maryanne to let her know what resonates. So you could leave a review, but another way that I would love to hear from folks, especially from this episode as we're back with Pod Friends, is with any voicemails. You could leave a voicemail, because this isn't my show. This is our show. This is the community's show. You can be part of the podcast by leaving a voicemail at speakpipe.com/podfriends. That's SPEAK pipe.com/podfriends. Or you could email me at podfriends@robhasawebsite.com, and it might even be read on an episode of Pod Friends. And so many more plugs. I'll give more of them after this is all up. But the one thing I want to kindly ask you to do as you sit there, wherever you're listening to the podcast, is to hit subscribe. Subscribe to Pod Friends to tune in for more episodes to come. There's a lot coming up this season, which will be really phenomenal. And if you don't have the podcast pull up right in front of you, which I don't know how you're listening to it, but still, you could subscribe at robhasawebsite.com/podfriendsfeed. And the last thing I'll say is there's never a bad time to become a patron and supporter of this community. This community, Rob Has a Podcast, is what allows there to be a pod friends and for us to have these conversations. And you can become a supporter at robhasawebsite.com/Patreon. So I don't want to hold things up. I want to dive right in. More plugs after the conclusion of this interview. But for now, let me introduce our guest. Making her way to the podcast, hailing from Ajax, Ontario, Canada, by way of Germany, by way of Kenya, please welcome a bright light, a gamer, a video and table, a reader, a rebel, an adventurer, a seminarian, a survivor, and a chaotic force for justice, the winner of Survivor 42, and a friend to you, to me, and to all, the one, the only Maryanne Oketch. So just as we get started, I want to give you, like a softball question, Maryanne. What's something that the people who probably know so much about you already, what's something that people would be surprised, gobsmacked, hoodwinked to know about you that they don't already know?
Oh my goodness, something that's gobsmacked, hoodwinked.
Hoodwink me, gobsmack me, surprise me.
Gobsmack. Oh, here's a good one.
Ooh.
I still am figuring out what I want to do with my life. Like, I think, like, a lot of times, when people do something, it feels like, oh, they have their life all put together. They have the future set in front of them. I'm still figuring that out. I'm still deciding and changing and making decisions and being like, I'm going to do this. Then be like, oh, wait, never mind. I don't want to do this. Or I'll change and do this. Or I'm going to do that. So I'm still exploring. I'm in the exploratory part of my life.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that even off the bat. And, as context, not that this defines everything, but are you 24 or 25?
Just turned 25.
Happy birthday, first
Thank
of all. But yes, you're 25 now. And like I turned 30 in 2022. And what was interesting is like it might seem on paper like there's not a big difference between like 20 and 25 or 25 and 30. And I feel like every year as you go along, there's just so much more life and growth. But it's interesting because I'm sorry that people think that you have it all figured out. Is that a lot of pressure?
I don't think it's a lot of pressure per se. I think it's more so just like the culture where I've been, like, and the people who have been in, right? Where people are like, oh, especially like coming from a very cerebral background, a very STEM background, people are like, oh, I'm going to first do my undergraduate, then I'm going to go into research, or I'm going to go do a second degree, and I'm going to go do this, or that after people already know their paths, right? And then when people divert from said path, so we have other people where it's like, oh, I'm going to do my undergraduate, but I'm going to switch degrees, or I'm going to switch focus. They still have that focus on what they want to do, whether it's like going and just working, whether it's going and just like pivoting, right? So I think that, like, especially being surrounded or like continually being surrounded by people who kind of already have that path and vision for them, while I'm still on that exploratory route, which is fine. It's like, oh, like, where's the end destination? I'm like, I'm just looking at what the destination is, like 2 steps forward, so I don't trip and fall.
Yeah, I feel like that's life though, where so often people have a plan or a path or something figured out like 10 steps down the line, if not all the way through the rest of their lives. And I just don't like, that's never been me to have those plans figured out. And I also feel like sometimes when people have the plans figured out so far ahead, like you realize like, oh, I've just been on autopilot doing what people think I should do. Sometimes, I think people have a path defined and figured out, and then they realize like, oh, that's not actually what I want to do. So not that you need to hear this from me, but totally okay that you're figuring it out. And actually, there was so much that I wanted to, and there is so much that I want to dive in with you today, Maryanne, because you are a fascinating person. There's so much to get into. But one of the things I actually was personally curious about was kind of this question, which is like, what is it that you're still trying to figure out about life, or what barriers or things are you looking to tackle? And maybe like to phrase that as a question that we could put out there from you to me, to the universe, to the listeners, like what are you trying to figure out other than like the bigger picture of where you want to go? Are there like core questions that you're like gripping with? We're really starting on a deep emotional note here, Maryanne.
Yeah, I know, right? You're like, let's start with a good one. We're like a simple one. I think for me, it's finding that relationship with work where it's like, because I know that I want to work with something that I'm passionate about, and that's like something which I want to do, but I have so many passions. It's hard to figure out, okay, how do I go and make sure that all my passions are together? Like, how do I make sure like that what I'm doing, it's exciting for me, that it's not just a bore, that it's not just something that I have to do. And, with Winning Survivor, I have that privilege where I'm able to go and have that flexibility and figure out where it's like, well, I want to do this because it interests me, not because I feel as if I have to. But then it's like, sometimes when I go and I explore my interests, it feels like there's still something missing. So
Mm-hmm.
one thing about me, I graduated from seminary college this year, and I was working in ministry for a bit,
Nice.
and it was very fulfilling, but not fulfilling enough. Like I still felt like an itch for like other parts of me that I wanted to input, which I felt as if I wasn't able to do in ministry, even though like it's a great, I had so much fun. I love the people there. I love the ministry that I was working with. So then it's trying to figure out, okay, so what is it that I really care about? What is it that I want to do? But then after having that like nervousness of like putting the work into it, but then also trying not to believe the sunken cost fallacy of then, oh,
Yeah.
well, if I do this and then I quit, it's not like a waste of my time. It's like I don't have to continue doing it, but it's also not me wasting X number of years. So just continue going on that path, discovering, do I like this? Do I not? What are the things I like about this? What are the things I don't like about this? And because discovering, giving your time to see if you like it takes time. That's the path that takes time.
Yeah, I love that though, because it's powerful to as you kind of think about like, am I wasting my time? And ultimately the thing that's so interesting to me is like we can't go back in terms of time, and we also can't jump forward. Like we're always in the present moment as we exist, as we interact with the world. And I think even that idea that we've lost time, like that we can't take that back, or it's like, oh my gosh, I wish I could do something with it. It's like so much of it's about reframing how we look at things and how we think of things. And I love that you have this question about your life and where it's going, because I always love to learn more and to dive deeper with people who are like looking for where they are in their journey. And so I feel like this is like weirdly turning into career coaching as opposed to a podcast interview. But I want to ask, like, because I feel like with you, Maryanne, obviously you've been places on podcasts and otherwise where people will introduce you and sum you up in a certain way. And I kind of want to ask another deep, big question, but this time with less words. Who are you?
Oh my goodness. Who am
I'm
I?
trying to give you an existential crisis, Maryanne. That's
I
exactly what I'm
I
doing.
know. I'll need to call Melissa. That's my therapist name. I'll just be like after this, be like,
Shout
Melissa,
out.
I need you. Shout out to Melissa. I love her.
Yes.
Who am I? I'm 25.
Mm.
I'm one survivor. I
Mm-hmm.
am first generation immigrant,
Mm-hmm.
a lover of food,
Ooh.
a lover of travel,
Yes.
passionate about identity, knowing who you are, passionate about my faith,
Mm-hmm.
passionate about um passionate about science communication and
Mm-hmm.
health promotion, especially in underrepresented communities.
Right.
Passionate about that. Lover of video games, specifically Nintendo.
Okay.
Lover of comfort, specifically blankets. I have a massive blanket collection, but you can never have too many blankets. And a new beanbag chair owner.
Ooh. Ooh. Okay. Well, we see the comfort. Hopefully the blankets are getting used on the beanbag chairs. And
Exactly.
and it's like I ask about that because and I ask about who you are. You did such a beautiful job summing yourself up, which I think is no surprise, Maryanne. But like it's interesting because so often when I'm talking to people, like in my work, my job is like It's a job. It's a job. I won't say it's barely a job. I was about to say that. But it's storyteller. And people are like, what is that? But a lot of that's like interviewing people and getting to know them and highlighting their stories, which also means like learning about career paths. And
Mm-hmm.
I always feel like people get in their heads about like, what should I do? What's a real job? What's not a real job? And then I also think about a lot of like very like especially different cultures where like certain jobs are not real jobs, which is something that I
Mm-hmm.
see come up a lot, especially in talking with like people from communities of color or immigrant communities and the like. And I'm so curious from you, like, was there an expectation of what job you would do as you were a kid? And you know, beyond that expectation that maybe like your parents might have had or your community might have had, like, what did you want to be growing up?
I wanted to be everything when I was growing up, like from astronaut to
Mm,
doctor to lawyer. But oh, to chef. I think I wanted to be a chef for a bit there. But I think for the expectation, at least from my experience, is that like, especially as a first generation immigrant, there's this thought where it's like my parents did not move like either countries or continents or like a half across the world for me not to either be in the same like socioeconomic or like higher
yeah.
socioeconomic level than them. So there's always that pressing expectation where it's like, okay, what am I get like? So it's like, what am I going to do like to make sure that I'm financially successful? So the sacrifices that my parents made were worth it, right? So
Hmm.
then that kind of leans into like where the jobs that you're thinking of. Like for example, I remember having a conversation with my mother and being like, I want to be a teacher. My mom's like, why not a professor? Or like it's always like I want to be a nurse, why not a doctor? Where it's like always that like pushing you to that next level where it's like not only is it for the what am I trying to say? The social view of the reputability of the role,
Right.
but like also the what's the word I'm looking for? The autonomy and authority that that role has, right? Where
Right.
it's like you're able to make your own decisions in that in the role that you're having, rather than other people making those decisions for you.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I mean, you mentioned your mom, for example, and I think of my mom who was a college professor. She retired right before the pandemic, but for like 30 years, like was a college professor, PhD and everything. So we both have doctor moms in different ways, but I
Mm-hmm.
could also imagine how having a mom like you mentioned you broke it down perfectly in terms of some of the considerations here that there's like a cultural element and then there's the standing of how society might perceive you, but then also just like the autonomy that comes with the role, especially in a world where that autonomy matters for, you know, certain groups who might be treated certain ways or not receive certain
Mm-hmm.
opportunities, so on and so forth. But I kind of want to like dig into that a little because I know from what I've seen, what I've heard, that you are a fan. Now I'm going to say this in a really awkward way. You're a fan of your mom. Is that
Yeah,
right?
I'm my mom's number one fan. Like I always root for her. She's my role model.
Yeah.
I think that like her story is amazing and I love sharing her story. So for those who don't know, my mom also first generation immigrant because I'm a first gen immigrant,
Hmm.
but she was born into poverty. But then after she like worked her way to then become a doctor in Kenya, that's where we're from. And there were a lot of different things. Like one time, like someone changed her like college application without her permission, like but then after, so she wasn't able to go to the actual school that she wanted to go to, then she had to transfer in after. Just a wild story. Then she was a doctor. She met
Yeah.
my dad then my dad wanted to get his PhD in Germany, so she gave up becoming a practicing doctor
Hmm.
so my dad could go and do his research, get his PhD. We moved to Canada. She
Yeah.
got her master's in Canada, but she realized she still wanted to pursue medicine. So she then became a doctor, went into residency in Canada, was the first Black doctor to do so in that specific program,
Wow.
faced adversity there, and then now she's a practicing family practitioner. And I think it's a great story of just like overcoming adversaries, overcoming like roadblocks to go and succeed on the dream that you're making, and then also not only overcoming those blocks, but then choosing to sacrifice for someone else, but not choosing to sacrifice on your dream out for the long term.
Yeah, that's really powerful to hear and to understand. Like for your mom, how did was there a point where you became aware of that story? I ask because I feel like with my mom still there are moments where I'm just like learning about a lot of the things that she navigated just because as a parent she didn't there was so much that she has taught me and my other siblings and everything. And my mom was also, as I mentioned, a college professor of like social inequality and world religions and a bunch of other topics where I felt like I learned about that along the way, but not always about like the struggles that she had until like now when I'm like, oh, I'm going through this. And she's like, oh, I've been there. I know that. So I'm curious, like, when did you become aware or start to appreciate your mom and the not only the challenges, but kind of like the superpowers that she was able to bring to the table?
I think when it comes to parents, the appreciation always comes after the fact,
Mhm.
after they've experienced that. When when you've gotten older and you get to have those discussions and and get to talk to them, like not just parent to child, but also kind of like in a mentor to mentee, peer to peer relationship and discussing
Mhm.
what they've experienced, right? So I feel as if like that appreciation of my mother really started to become in high school when it was just me and my mom because my dad was like working abroad, my sister was in school, my brother was also in school. So there's just a lot of time when it was just me and my mom, and we just had so much time
Mm.
just to talk to each other and get to know one another, just like even more. Which I really started to develop that deep appreciation for her journey and what she's done.
Wow. Yeah. And I think one thing that's also fascinating just in talking about not only your mom and your dad, but also just how you grew up is that something I really appreciate about you is just kind of like thinking about who is Maryanne, like what makes Maryanne Maryanne. Um, you describe yourself as a weird, or you have described yourself as a
Hmm.
weird person, which, first of all, I want to ask Maryanne, what is so weird about you? I have a bone to pick with you about this. Are you weird?
Yes. Don't you dare try to take my weird card from me. That's so
I'm trying to
disrespectful.
strip it away from you at this
No,
point.
you're not
Conspiracy.
stripping the weird card away from me. I
Yeah.
think it's just like specifically like where the thing where it's weird was like more like that the exuberant personality, like the like the more the personality weird. Like I would always push the boundaries and that sometimes is weird, but like when you think of push the boundaries, you're thinking like, oh yeah, she dismantled the system. No, I'm talking about in I have a great story that'll prove exactly. In
Yeah,
seventh
please.
grade, so in the school that we had a dress code, right?
Mhm.
So the dress code was okay, you must have like if you're wearing shorts, the shorts must be like farther than the tips of your fingers,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So then I realized I thought the rule was kind of like okay, whatever, but I realized I had this oversized t-shirt and my t-shirt was just longer than like than the hands of my like of the rule. So then what I did was that I took my pants off in the middle of school and I'm like,
No.
yes. And I was like, you can't do anything because according to the dress code, this is allowed. So like all you can do is ask, but you cannot force me to put my pants on. So then I do like I just used to do that. Then so I just like be walking around, running around with my pants, and I'm just like, what are you gonna do about it? Because it follows the rules. And then yeah. So I put the pants on after. I wouldn't just keep the pant like just wasn't running around pantless the whole day, but stuff like that, right?
You're like a big time rebel, Maryanne. Like, would you describe yourself? What I mean, that's what it sounds like to me. But is that right, or
I
is this just the moment
it's
you had?
I think it's is it really rebelling if you're following the rules?
Mm.
That's the question. Well, I
Well, it
think
depends who makes the rules, probably, and all a bunch of
it's
other
it's like
deep things.
I think yes, maybe yes. I've always been someone where it's like pushing for fairness and like also like I've been someone where it's like if I think a rule's dumb, I won't follow it. That's just who I am. Where I'm just like you need like if the rule makes sense, I'll follow it. Like if it's a dumb rule, I'm not gonna follow that rule. But then I
Mhm.
think where it's like in that dress code thing, it's like, look, you're gonna say shorts are bad, but then
Yeah.
after this rule, technically in your guidelines, it's right. So clearly there's something that's off there. But maybe yeah, I'm a little bit of a rebel.
Well,
Take
I mean, I guess I'm curious, like thinking about that. Seen that rebel? Have you seen that rebellious streak, if we're gonna call it that? Because now you're definitely a rebel, so I'm gonna keep saying it.
Oh my
But have
gosh.
you seen that in other parts of your life? Otherwise, I'm trying to really establish this archetype of yours as an unstoppable rebel. What I don't know. I was gonna say devil may care or whatever
Like
it's called.
I'd say it's more of a chaotic force for justice, where a lot of
Ooh.
times where it's like if I see something is unfair, I will call it out as it is.
Uh-huh.
Like, I just had a story which I was like thinking of, like a whole anecdote, but I can't remember what it is exactly at the time. But there's a lot of times when it's like where if I think something is unfair, like I'll call it out as I see it. Like I know that
Mhm.
like I've been like where it's like it comes with my personality, where it's like a lot of people see it as a combative personality, where like I'll be like, this is unfair. Why are we doing this way? This is very rude, and I'll do it usually for others or
Yeah.
sometimes even for myself. Like sometimes where I feel as if I'm being treated unfairly, like I'll just go off and just
Yeah.
like be like, this is like the way that this is unfair. This is the double standard that's being shown. Da, 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 right? So, but there's a balance to be said, right? Where it's like I'm fine pulling it up for others, but for myself, I usually am just like, this is okay, this is okay, this is okay. But then when it's not okay, I'm like, all of these things weren't okay, which
Yeah.
also isn't fair to the people as well because you're not communicating that.
Yeah, yeah, and the thing I appreciate about that is that I definitely relate a lot to that where, I am and I think especially just like when you experience things in your life, especially negative things or challenging things or systemic barriers or whatever it might be that comes up, then when you have things that don't carry that same weight, at least for me personally, it's really easy to be like, I'm not going to waste my energy on that. I'll move on. It's not a big deal. But for the next person who's like, I feel like just like you, I've been the person who is more concerned with like my friends or my family. Don't mess with my friends. Don't mess with my family. Don't mess with any of my teammates, anyone like that. Because, I don't know. It just feels easier sometimes to stand up for others. But it is interesting because one thing I'm always so fascinated by with pod friends is digging into like where that thing comes from. Where did you become that person who stands up for other people, or do you like know where or how you became that person? Was it from your mom's spirit of like, I'm going to do what I need to do while also watching out for like what my husband wants or what my family wants, or was it from somewhere else?
Hmm. I can't give you a definitive answer on that. Like it's always just been something. I've always been someone, even as a kid, who's like cared about like fairness. Like
Hmm.
even I think maybe it comes like especially from like being that middle child, just making sure that like I'm getting the same amount of love as my older sister and my younger sister and my younger brother. Oh, sorry.
Uh-huh.
And then just like and then now it just like extrapolating, expanding to the other facets of my life, being like, well, if this is like what's happening and I want fairness for myself, it's like I want to have fairness for others.
Yeah, and by the way, I will say this conversation weirdly reminds me of your Survivor bio before, from on CBS.com before
Mm-hmm.
Enter the Season. It's still up there. And I was so fascinated reading it back like in the last few days because I was thinking, damn, Maryanne is a psychic. Like she's got it figured out. She knows she's gonna win Survivor. Da, 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 da. But I think one of the things that jumps out to me is it mentions like your time at university and you
Mm-hmm.
standing up to systemic racism as a black student at the university.
Mm-hmm.
But I, as someone who was, when I was in college, was all about advocating for, our students on campus. And now, as someone who's really about pushing it back against the systemic barriers, I was just fascinated by that. And I'm curious, like, what that was like for you, because I know that when I was a university student and pushing back, even against things that were not about race, that was difficult. And so I'm curious, like, what happened without getting Podfriend sued? What happened, and kind of, how did you navigate pushing back?
Yeah, I think this one, I think for the university really shows the importance of having that platform, having someone advocate for you. So what happened for that article that I wrote in university, I
Hmm.
was actually reached out to by a friend to write that article for Black History Month. So she was like, "Oh, I want to hear about like different people's experiences about especially like for Black students about the university. I'd love to hear like what people are saying, right?"
Yeah.
So at first I was like, yeah, sure, I'll say something. But then I remember having a conversation with a friend, like with another friend, and we were just talking about, because we were in different programs, but we were similar because you had to apply and have so in Canada, not
Yeah.
every program has a supplementary application, only
Hmm.
some do. And so
Hmm.
we were talking about how, since we were both in programs that had supplementary applications, we were talking about how we didn't see a lot of Black people in these programs. Like, that was just something which we
Oh
didn't
wow.
see.
Yeah.
And then so I realized we both have the same experience. I'm like, well, if I have the same experience, she went to a different school and she has the same experience. Maybe there's other people who have that experience. So then I put a call. So our school, we had a Facebook group for Black students of McMaster University. I put in a
Oh,
call
awesome.
being like, have you ever been like a student in like a specifically like either specifically in supplementary application based programs or any program, and have you ever like, can you tell me your story, tell me your experience, right? And every single person had very similar experiences where it's like where they're talking about that feeling of like isolation or feeling as if they had to be the representative of their whole race, which adds pressure to you. And then after, it's a cycle where it's like, if it's
Yeah.
adding pressure, you don't have, but the program uses you to like say, oh, we're like, look, we have diversity, but they're not giving you the supports to help
Hmm.
you succeed in being one of the first Black students. Like, specifically for me, I was the first Black student in my program. With There were three of us, and I was the first Black student to graduate from my program. And
Hmm.
then just feeling those feelings of isolation, and then seeing that it's something that a lot of people felt across the border, even people talking about how they felt when they were learning about systemic racism and like injustice, how they felt
Hmm.
that they were the ones who had to answer when they just wanted to learn as well too. And just it was and just like hearing that this was something that so many people have experienced, but we've never talked about it. I'm just like, you know what, I'm gonna write from my perspective, write from other people's perspective, just because I had
Hmm.
that platform to go and write. And that article was so well received in both like the
Oh.
student community. It was received well in the university community. I actually got to go and have a meeting with the equity, inclusion, diversity officer because of it, and like share my thoughts about how I felt, why I wrote this, why other people were writing this, what the issues were, about like not knowing, like about like how there were supports, but these supports weren't advertised. So then it's like we don't
Hmm.
have any supports, because that's another issue as well too.
Wow.
And then like talking about like how like the feelings, especially in a lot of these supplementary programs, a lot of them are group based, and then talking about like how group dynamics, and then people who like are known, and how people will go and relate to people who they feel similar to, how
Yes.
that even adds like a second layer where it's like, okay, if people aren't similar to you, if people are going and being raised and like and have never really interacted with someone who's racialized, then it's like, how does that affect what, like how do the like the biases go and lean to how people will treat you in said program, and how does that go and also affect you and you as a person? Does it give you like a self-fulfilling prophecy? Do
Yeah.
you have to like, are you confident enough to push through? So there's just so many good discussions that were gone through that, and that
Hmm.
all came from just like the opportunity to speak, right? The
Wow.
opportunity for someone being like, hey, do you want to write this? Hey, do you want to do this? Do you want to share your story? Because giving that platform is such a powerful thing, because a lot of people might have that story, but there might not be opportunity to go and say that platform. So some
Hmm.
people, yes, are able to go and then force themselves and make themselves have a platform so people will listen, and that's great. But other people might not feel comfortable doing so, which is why allyship is so important. Having that person who's like, hey, this is something which I know is an issue, would you like to speak on it? Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a whole story.
No, it was a great story, and I was in it. And just like I also just found myself getting emotional hearing it, because there is such a huge difference between the urge to take an action and actually take an action.
Mm-hmm.
Like that little leap, even if it's the leap of hitting send on the thing that you wrote or
Mm-hmm.
publishing it, because I always feel like when you're doing something that involves speaking up, especially if
Mm-hmm.
it's about something like race, where you know that you have to explain to people or help them understand the dynamics and
Mm-hmm.
group dynamics, and you really broke down a lot of it, that there could be a hesitation. Do you remember there being a hesitation or any hesitations for you in pushing for that and doing that? And if so, kind of how did you get past those?
Mm-hmm. I think for specifically the article, there wasn't any hesitation, but that's because I had a prior experience that kind of broke the ice, I think, for me. So a little bit of a story time in this is
Yeah.
my high school and a lot of elementary school, I actually went to a predominantly white high school. And
Yeah.
so a lot of my times it was like just like survive or be survive, like survive, like kill or be killed was kind of like
Mm,
the vibe which I got. And
yeah.
like I remember even going and trying to like make myself a model minority and like push myself and be like, well, I'm not like these other black students. Like I remember being like, oh, I'm the resident black kid, but I'm like, it's like I love science and all these things. So instead of going and like accepting the parts of me, I tried to go and like separate me as a person to who my race was to try to feel that acceptance, right?
Yeah.
So this was something that was kind of my defense mechanism. But I remember one time it was Easter, I think of the Easter before I wrote the article. I can't remember what the year is right now. I'm blanking a bit. But I was at a station. I just remember like feeling just such discomfort in the presence of police force because of the situation, being like
Yeah.
wanting like because there was something that was happening and no one was there. It was only me and the two police officers and one person, and then wanting to say something, but then after just like feeling as if I didn't have a voice, and then being like and feeling that I didn't have a voice because of my race, and then
Hmm.
being like and then feeling that feeling and knowing that I did not want to have that feeling again, being like I
Yeah.
okay, and then trying to show myself I do have a voice, I do have a right to, I do have a right to speak up, I do have a right to ask questions, I do have a right to go and point out issues. Was that was the big turning point for me, because that situation happened. Now when someone offered me that platform, I didn't have that hesitation. I'm like, I like, this is a platform from which I know that I can have. And then sometimes when people feel as if they don't have a platform, or they feel as if like the platform might be courtesy, they might go and step back. But it's like I know that like I have that platform. I've known from my past experiences that I
Yeah.
always have that platform, that I want to take that opportunity and then speak to things which I might not have felt comfortable speaking for even a year ago or even 2 years ago.
Wow, wow, wow. I am like so amazed and thankful even just for what you're sharing. And I relate so much to it as someone who grew up going to like primarily white institutions like my whole life, some less diverse than others, high school, college. And I think that it's so challenging to find that place where you find your voice and to also it's challenging to have other people who don't come from that background understand like how much you go through just to be able to show up and do something like what you talked about, or how much I don't know if strength's the word, but just how much really it takes to be able to do that. And I feel like the tears well up a little bit in my eyes, like hearing that from you, just knowing the weight of that, and but also how much of like a superstar you are just for even being able to navigate that. And also I'm sure people listening to this, myself included, flash forward into your journey into something that was a lot more visible that you're constantly asked about, with the tribal council, the famed tribal council, in your season of Survivor Star 42, where you spoke up about a lot of these issues. And I think that one thing that's great is you've done such a powerful job breaking down why you spoke up. I think a lot of what
Mm-hmm.
you've said here speaks to that. But you know, the thing that I want to kind of say from my perspective to like thank you is that not only did watching you speak up mean so much to me as like a young black man in particular, like oh my god, I could trust in Maryanne to voice the things that I can't say from the opposite side of the screen. But also, that meant so much to me personally, even just from the perspective of playing some of these like fan made live reality games where I'm like, I wish I had the words at times to voice
Mm-hmm.
what you were able to kind of say. But you know, you've talked so much about that moment and that experience. I don't know if there's anything, is there anything you know you haven't voiced or said just about um that that platform in that space that you had to speak up, because I know that I feel like everybody asks about it at this
Yeah. Like I think the thing which I have to add to it is I feel as if a lot of times when people have platforms to speak about issues and justices, right? People have the feeling and the fear that they need to have everything right, that they need to have everything perfectly correct for
point.
it to have merit or worth. And I want to say that's incorrect. Like, you don't
Mm,
need to have all the words right. You don't need to have all your, like, every single fact right, like every single thing, because you're speaking from your experience and you're speaking from your story and you're speaking from your perspective. And just being able to go and share your story, that will connect with people. Like, there'll be always, so even if like you're a little bit wrong, people are like, most people aren't going to be like, oh well, this one fact is wrong. They're going to see the
mhm.
gist of it, they're going to see the story of it. They're not going to go and look, they're not going to look at when you maybe stumbled on your words, or when you used a word wrong, or when you maybe
No,
were
yeah,
slightly wrong. So it's like having that platform to speak. You don't need to be polished, you just need to speak from the heart, I think is a very big thing, which I think is important, especially about that moment as well. Where it's like,
yeah.
when I spoke about it, it's like what I said wasn't perfect. What I said wasn't like, it didn't encompass everything, wasn't the be all, the end all. Like, it wasn't, right?
From my perspective, it was
No,
perfect enough. It was perfect enough. But I get what you
exactly.
mean. I
But
get what you
that's what
mean.
it is. It was
Yeah.
perfect enough.
Hmm.
But the thing is, in my perspective, it wasn't perfect, but I still said it.
Yeah, yeah. And I will say this, like, and not to make it about me and my experience, but something that I just appreciate so much is that, I've only I have this is very different from the Survivor experience, but like my literal experience interacting with Survivor beyond watching was like playing a live reality game where I found myself in a group of fans, mostly there was one other black person, but it was mostly like white fans, and speaking about these things in a time that was before season 41, before season 42, before
Mm-hmm.
season 43. And so I just have to say how thankful I am as a person, as a Survivor fan, all of that. And I know I speak for so many people in how meaningful how meaningful it's been to have that representation. But I want to ask you, because you're in this like interesting space where obviously you're a Survivor fan, not only of new school Survivor, but of what this whole thing has been, probably since the beginning. I'd imagine. I know that you're a Survivor historian far more than I
Oh
am,
my
so
goodness. No, 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 no.
definitely more than I am. That's
Okay.
but I think I ask, like, how does it feel for you to be surrounded by so much more, or so much diversity in general in terms of what Survivor is? I mean, I think of like Wendell and Bryce, obviously, and the community that they bring together with Bryce and Wen Presents. And I think of Davey, who I know was one of your inspirations going into Survivor. And again, if anyone wants to go back and read what you wrote in the cast bio, which was like a little bit prophetic, you could about that. But like, what has that been like to have that diverse community? And maybe I realize that you obviously don't have the benefit necessarily of like, here's what this experience for me was like as a player without that community, and here's what it was
Mm-hmm.
like with it. But like, what has that meant for you to be surrounded by so many more people who kind of get it than maybe in the past?
Honestly, it's something which I'm just really honored and like so happy that that's where we're moving forward. Like, you have people who you get it with, right? Because the thing about Survivor, it's a social game, right? So the more people when you're playing and who have played who get it, the better your like footing is, because you're not like one step behind. But the thing that it makes me feel is that, and just like I said about fairness, it makes me like want, like, in a perfect world for everyone to like be able to have that community, be able to have people who look like them when they're in the community, be able to be welcomed into open hands. Like, there's beauty in being a trailblazer, but like
Mm,
but the hope is that no one has to ever be a trailblazer again. No one has to be the first this or the first that, or like the
yeah.
first in X many years of like winning or playing or experiencing Survivor, where it's just so common that you can be like, oh, this is one part of my identity. It's like, oh, look, like for example, oh, look, I'm black. Here's a black winner.
Yeah.
Here's a black winner. Here's a black winner. Oh, look, I'm someone who I say I'm very nerdy. Here's a nerdy winner. Here's a nerdy winner. Here's a nerdy. I'm a
Yeah.
woman. Here's a woman winner. Here's a woman, like with all the different facets of your identity, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like you can see that part of their identity, not be like, oh, I'm the first this, or like I'll be the first this. Where it's like, oh, it's like, oh yeah, this is someone else who's done it. Like, this is normal. Like, I can do it too. Where it's not just like, can I do it? Will I be the first? But you can do it because others have done it before.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of others who've done it before, though, and I don't know. So we were just talking about a podcast that you were on very recently, where you mentioned something that I'd never heard, speaking of winners, about Wendell. And you were in touch with you happened to be connected with Wendell prior to your Survivor
Mm-hmm.
experience. I love and adore Wendell. Previous pod friends, guests, shout out to Wendell, and also just an amazing person who I'm thankful to get to know a little bit through the community and Bryce the One Presents. But like, are there any people? I mean, if Wendell's one of them, that's great. Are there any people though who you'd kind of like shout out as helping create that space for you, from that, from the Survivor alumni, that is, or current players, like
Mm-hmm.
anyone who's kind of helped make a more welcoming space that you want to shout out in particular?
Of course. Like I think one thing for Wendell, especially I was connected with Wendell before I played and just like having like I remember thinking even like talking to Wendell and I also knew Dom, which
Yeah,
is how I was connected to Wendell, being like,
right.
oh yeah, like I'm gonna have a fun time playing, but like statistically speaking, a winner is this age and this range and this range. So like probably not gonna work out. But then them being like, no, it like don't count yourself out. It's like you can win. It's like you like there are people like you who can win. It's like it's not just about that. Like having that encouragement as well means a lot. Or like even like talking to Dom, where it's like I had like or talking to Dom and him being like, no, I see you being like a Survivor player. Like I can see you being there. It's like like you are on the island. Having that encouragement also means a lot, like to me as well too. Or like even during the Survivor experience as well too, like Gabby Pascuzzi from David vs.
Yeah.
Goliath. We're both emotional people. It's
Hmm.
like this is like a great like adventure, or just like being able to connect with her, just like pretty much anyone who's ever like messaged in the Survivor community with open arms. It's like it's just such like I feel as if like the overall community is just such a positive and welcoming community, like all just across the board, where I've never felt not accepted.
Yeah, and a thing that I at least I guess I could appreciate from being part of that community is how much just even seeing you and how much love you give to people. And so there are two things that come to mind for me. One of them is a whole story that Teresa Cooper, shout out to T-Bird, again, former Pod Friends person, mentioned just in relation to you at an event in Atlanta. She was saying just how you showed up for someone. And I think of T-Bird in this moment, just how touched she was seeing your example of showing love to the community. But the other thing is that I have a distinct memory, and I actually was talking with a couple of friends about this who met you at the event here in Washington, D.C., where I met you. And it's two of my friends, Kyle and Keegan, who just had gotten engaged. And they asked to take a picture with you. You looked and saw, I think, like the rings on their finger, and you were like, "Oh my God, are you married?" And they were like, "No, no, no." And you were like, "I love love. I love this so much." And you just were like enveloping them with so much love, as you do with like a lot of people, with everyone in this community. I will say, as an introvert who has limited amounts of energy, I do not know how I don't know how someone is able to just share so much love. But where does that love come from that you have? Because it inspires me a lot. Like the world needs it.
Yeah. I think like a really big part of my love and personality, like I said, it all comes down, especially to my faith.
Hmm.
So like I know like I'm someone who I'm Christian, and like for me, like the biggest thing which I always like look up to is like try like we're just like loving and caring and meeting people where they're at and loving, and like that's just some like attributes where a lot of people see, where I see it in Christ, where it's like he would always go take time for people. Like people would approach him and then like even his disciples would be like, oh no, like you can't talk to this person or we're too busy, but like he'd always take time and like be genuine and like be genuinely interested with those interactions. In
Hmm.
my personality, like I'm a very big people person. I like that's something which I have. Like I love people, I love connecting, and like that's something where it's like I have the ability to do it. I have the ability to connect with people. I have the ability to like learn stories, right? Which is so
Hmm.
funny because I'm horrible with names, but like I'll remember like faces and experiences, but I'm just so bad with names. So, like I genuinely like I'm like, what are you doing? Like, why are you here? This is so cool. Like and like I do genuinely love love. Like I remember I was at like for example, I was at Disney just this December, someone
Yeah.
recognized me and they were there on their like they got engaged. Like they dated for 8 months and they just got engaged,
Oh
and they
wow.
weren't engaged at Disney, but they were engaged. They were doing like their engagement trip in Disney, and I still remember them, and I hope that they're doing well. And like, because like I genuinely like these interactions genuinely do mean a lot, and I'm like, oh, I wonder how they're doing. I wonder how everything's fine, because I'm genuinely,
Wow.
I just love, like, there's so many different people who all have different stories, and like when you interact with them, they become a piece of your story and you become a piece of theirs, and it's just,
Mhm.
I think that's just such a beautiful thing.
This is it's like powerful to hear and so interesting. It's so the love just radiates off of you, Maryanne. It's glowing. I hope people are watching the video just to see the glow, the glow of love. I don't know, but I think that it's great even just to hear how much I don't know how much you're also able to feed off of that love. And I actually think of someone. So I grew up going to going to a well, actually a bunch of Catholic schools, even though I'm not Catholic. And in high school I went in like all boys Catholic school, and I had this one advisor who used to like give this talk at school, which funnily enough, like one time I recommended him for a TEDx talk, and now it has like 3 million or 4 million views. And his message was so simple. It was love and be loved. His name's Billy Ward, by the way.
Mhm.
And maybe I'll send you the link to his TED talk or something. But like just the idea that, in order to be loved, we also have to put out love. And, that's something that you're displaying. But, I will say, as someone, I think like when I asked you earlier about like what is like what's weird about you, Maryanne, like something that came to mind for me that I feel like is so weird about me is like I am not an extrovert. I'm definitely an introvert, but I'm also like an extroverted introvert, or someone who comes off as more social at times. And I struggle sometimes to like especially connect within these community events just because it's so overwhelming. Like
Mhm.
Maryanne is right in front of me. What am I supposed? Sari was in front of me at one point, and I was like, I don't even know. I can't. But that's probably a common experience. Do you have advice for people to like navigate not only this our little survivor RHAP community, but
Mhm.
do you have advice for people to navigate like the nerves in terms of connecting with community? Because especially, I mean, as a natural, you probably have some amazing advice for that.
Yes. I think the biggest advice, which it comes from it, was when you're interacting with people, when you're meeting with people won't remember the exact details. They'll remember the gist of it, right? So it's like if you stumble on your words, people won't be like, "Oh my gosh, I remember when I met Matt at this event. Like he stumbled on his words a couple times, like messed up things, but then overall, like I remember like for the DC event, like I met you, and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember I met Matt. Like Matt likes XYZ. Matt knows this, right? So it's like you don't need to be worried about the whole procedural part about meeting people because that's not what people are going to remember. They're going to remember the gist, right? And it's like, and the fear of the procedural, I think, is so small based on the experience of meeting the person that you want to meet, right? Like,
Uh-huh.
it's like I met Boston Rob recently. And I
Hmm.
remember just being so gagged, and I was like, "Oh my gosh!" And I have some like buffs which I got, and I'm like, I need to get Boston Rob and Ethan Zahn to like sign my Winners at War
Oh
buff, and
yeah.
I was like, and I remember thinking, "Oh my gosh, I'm gonna look so nerdy if I do this," and I'm like, yeah, I'll look nerdy, but then I'll get signatures on the buffs. So like that's a win.
Yes.
So I literally went up, I was just like, Rob, I'm just like, can you sign this for me? And like, Ethan, can you sign this for me? And it's like they probably were just like, oh yeah, that's that Maryanne who went and got this signed. They're not gonna be like, they're like, it's like, but the thing is, whatever they think of me, I got my signature. Like I got the like it doesn't matter what they think because I got the signature. I got what I wanted out of that experience. I got what I wanted out of that interaction, Unless like you're being like
Yeah.
extremely malicious. I'm not saying like do something evil, man, because it doesn't matter what the other person thinks. But
No.
in the small into consequential like connections and interactions, it's like it doesn't like the small things about like being a little awkward or being a little nervous. It doesn't really it doesn't matter because it's about what you want to get out of that interaction too.
Look at that, Maryanne. You have so much to give to the world. Not only in terms of your perspective, but just like a beautiful way of like putting it together and saying and reassuring people and all of that. I want to ask, in follow up. So, because I think this is an interesting topic in that, as when I joined Rob as a podcast, have the beautiful mug right here. I
Mm-hmm.
joined RHAP though as part of the class of 2020,
Yep.
call of new podcasters and the like. And then, that was the first time I really got involved in the community and went to events. And I went to a bunch of Bryson Wen Presents events, and it was interesting to get to know people in the community, like as friends, and also to see like how they interacted with these, like with the different people who'd come into the space, like the Cerise, the Maryannes, casual superstars, legends. But I want to ask, something I realized in this last season, in particular season 43, and even interacting with some of the players on the season throughout, is like so often people will come up and they will ask you about Survivor, which I'm sure is appreciated. But I wonder, are there like are there questions or aspects of your life that you wish people asked about more? Because I would imagine that oftentimes you do get the same questions from folks.
Um, you know what? My answer is no.
Mm,
And the reason is this. It's like people will come and ask you about questions about what they need or what they want in that moment, you know?
uh-huh.
So if they want things about Survivor and I'm like, "No, but ask like let me tell you about this." It's like they're not it's not providing benefit or value in that interaction or that
Yeah.
conversation. It's not like it's not going to get out of it, right? So like I love sharing my story, but the reason I love sharing my story is because there's many parts of the story which are impactful, right? But
Mhm.
like it's like I won't go and tell like, but a part of storytelling is like knowing which story and when to tell it,
Yeah.
right? So like if I'm talking, someone's asking about Survivor, then maybe talking about like the story about my mom, it doesn't have provide value in that moment. Doesn't mean that that story isn't less important, but it means that it doesn't just have value in that situation, right?
Mm.
When like a lot of times people will like ask other questions like, oh, how do you get your confidence? How do you do this? And then that's when I can go and talk about it because that provides value to that moment in that moment. So like honestly, any question that's asked, I really do appreciate because I know that it provides value in that moment. And I know that there's still be other times to share my story, like based on whether it's like interactions which I have known because of Survivor, whether just it's day-to-day interactions in the workplace or just like when I'm just like out and about. And that's when it's important for that story to be told.
Yeah, I love what you're saying too. And I also love your appreciation for just speaking to kind of going with the flow of life
Mm-hmm.
and people and how people are naturally inclined. And you know, because I guess the follow-up question I have, and this might be a tough one. I wonder if anything will come up, but are there let me frame this a little. Sometimes I feel like in life, there are moments where you have a conversation or an interaction where it's like, wow, I even surprised myself with whatever I shared or whatever came out. But thinking of some of those interactions you mentioned with the community and like some of the questions that people have, has there been any like advice or wisdom or insight that you've shared that like surprised you or jumped out that listeners of Pod Friends could potentially benefit from? Anything that you haven't touched on?
Um, like I think the biggest thing, especially where the most advice which I've noticed I've said commonly is a lot of people then ask, oh, how did you get on Survivor? What should I do to get on Survivor? Or like, what did you do to get on Survivor? But I think that, and I actually heard it first from Adam Klein, and he has like the
Mm,
best way to say it. And that's like, don't live your life that like you were trying to
yes.
get on Survivor. Live a life that's worthy of getting on Survivor. And the way
Mm-hmm.
that I interpret that is like, honestly, just live like, and it even can be extrapolated outside of
Mm-hmm.
Survivor, where it's like, live the life that you want to live. Don't always live just focusing only on the end goal. You mentioned about earlier about like people
Yeah.
driving on autopilot and they're not noticing the stops on the way. And I'm
Yeah.
someone where I really love the stops. Like I really, and it's something which is always there. Like I remember one time I had a concert, but the concert was the day before a massive midterm, and everyone's like, "Oh, I guess you're gonna have to not go to the concert." And I'm like, "No, I'm going to this concert." Where it's like being able to go and live life and like see the and like smell the roses, see the flowers, like say yes to the experiences and opportunities, whether you think you're ready for those opportunities or not. Like being able to say yes, like, and like even if you go and do the opportunity and like you don't like it, at least you've done it. Like recently, I walked off the edge of the CN Tower, which is one of the tallest
Oh
like
yeah.
freestanding buildings. I hated it, and I would not do it again. But the opportunity was there. I'm like, you know what? Let me try it. Let me see if it's there, because like that's something that's so cool, and it pushes me out of my bounds. So, and you know, just explore and experience.
Wow. And I love this, and I just even like love diving in with you about, how you look at life, because I think that it's really easy for people just to pick up on your energy and like the words that you might say. But I hope that like this conversation helps people get a grasp, or a more full grasp of not only who you are, but also I think maybe more importantly, like who they could potentially be. And that's one of the things I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate about just how you show up, is that it really just gives more options for people who are looking for examples and for representation. Like, oh, because look, Maryanne, I wasn't even planning on mentioning this, but when we DM'd about pod friends and setting this up and everything, I looked back and I saw that I sent you a message on like a DM where I was like, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
Maryanne, you probably will never see this. It was right when you won Survivor," and I was just like, thank you for showing up and showing that people like you, and the way I put it at the time was like just nice people,
Mm-hmm.
but people who bring all that you bring can succeed in life, and that's an important lesson. And so I appreciate that that people get that from you. But I wonder, beyond the inspiration that like I get that others get from you, are there other people beyond your mom, like we've talked about, who Dr. Mom, I'm sorry, who like other people who like inspire you, or inspirations, role models that you might have, whatever you'd want to call them?
Oh my goodness. Any inspirations or role models? Let me think about that. Um, I think it's people very just like close around in my life that inspire me. Like like I love how my sister, my older sister, she when she has a passion, she follows that passion regardless of what anyone else thinks. I inspire that like tenacity. That's
Yeah.
something that's amazing. I love how like my brother just literally takes life by the reins. If he wants to do something, he'll figure out a way to do it, and he'll do it. Even if it might make some bad, even if there's some bad decisions, he'll still do it. Like there's just so many people in my life just like surrounding. Like I love, for example, for my season, I love Tori. She has such a passion, especially for women
Yeah.
and like self confidence, and like and especially like for like disordered eating. That like she has that passion, and she puts and like she doesn't care how like she doesn't care about like how well it does. She's just like, and it is doing well, mind you. Like, but like she's just like, this is something I'm passionate about. This is something which I feel I need to speak about. I'm just gonna speak and put it out there, and the people who will listen, and that she just has that
Yeah.
drive. Like I just so many people who like I just like inspire me just in my life, just surrounding me. Like I feel as if I get the inspiration most from people who like are around me.
Yeah, and I mean, I know that. So I think that's powerful, like what you've shared about the inspiration you're finding. Going back to where we started this conversation, maybe unexpectedly, probably, well, definitely unexpectedly for me, with you talking about like looking for your path and where you want to
Mm-hmm.
go. I kind of want to come back to that, because I am very curious. I don't know. I feel like I want to come to some kind of conclusion, or like, Maryanne, here's the career you should have. You should be a teacher of da 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 da, and but I don't know. But I think back to that, and the question of where you want to go is fascinating to me, coming from you, because I think that it's no secret you, like, even in this conversation, are so good at processing and evaluating. You might not have the answer of what you want to do with your life, but how do you think you might go about figuring out the answer? This is a big question, but
Like just like I said, just by trying and exploring, and then like just basically doing the James Cameron Avatar route, where you're gonna
mhm,
go, you make Avatar, no one remembers it, and you're just gonna keep on throwing stuff at it until
uh-huh,
something sticks.
uh-huh,
So like throw stuff at it that So figure out what my interests are and then throw it at. Be like, okay, I love speaking. Maybe I want to do public speaking. It's like I'm very passionate about my faith. Maybe I want to go into ministry. It's like I love health. It's like I love health communication and promotion. Maybe I want to go somewhere in that. Just seeing those passions, throwing at it, trying it out, seeing if it sticks. And then if it does stick, then there we go. If it doesn't stick, let's figure out what parts of it, why didn't it stick? What did I like about it? What did I not like about it? And then move forward with that information.
Yeah, I mean, Maryanne, I have to ask though, like, because I love when people put things out into the universe. I know that there's not a clear idea of here's exactly what I want. But if you just have to put out into the universe where you would be in 5 years, when you turn 30, and things that you might want to be able to kind of look back on or have achieved or accomplished, or things you might have wanted to grow into, whatever that would be, off the top of your head, Maryanne, what are some of those things that you hope 5 years from now you'd be able to throw anything out? It could be anything.
Oh my gosh, 5 years from now, I would want to. I'm just doing the math to just figure out some math.
Don't worry, you'll still be young at 30. Trust me.
The math. Okay, 5 years from now, I would want to maybe buy my first home. Maybe know more about where the path is. Have enough things that stuck out that I'm like, okay, so this is kind of where I'm going, or this is where I am right now. What else? I'd love to have gone to Australia by the time I'm 30. Love travel, something about that. By the time I'm 30, this is the unhinged part of me. I'd love to be married by the time I'm 30.
Ooh.
What else would I by the time I'm 30? That's all I got for you right now.
Having a home, buying a home, having a home, going to Australia to visit Shan and Gus, of course.
You got it.
And which also, I'm hoping Shannon's listening to this, because I told Shannon last time I saw her, the first time I met her, which was a few months ago, I need to go out to Australia. So maybe I'll let you know when I'm going, and then I'll Maryanne, I have an extra ticket. It's expensive. We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out. And being married, all that, so powerful. And I'm glad you put it out there. And if it's anything like your Survivor cast bio, it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. So I have to ask though, there's one more big question I have. Well, there are a few more questions I have for you, but one question I have, and I appreciate you just how amazing you are going with all of my questions, but I am curious, is there, looking back, so I don't know if this is looking back at yourself 5 years ago or as a teenager or child or whatever it might be, but is there advice that you now have for your younger self, just in retrospect? I feel like I should be holding up a picture of you, like baby you, like Maryanne, advice you have for your younger self.
Advice I have. Yeah, the advice that I have for my younger self, it's genuinely just keep being you. Like, you're on the right path. You're just keep being you. You don't have to change yourself. Good call on that for not feeling like you have to change yourself. Just don't, be genuinely you. You don't have to push people away because you feel as if you won't be accepted. You'll be accepted. The people who will care for you will care for you. Just keep being genuinely you, and then it'll work out.
Wow. Maryanne, this is beautiful. And I have to say, before asking my final question, I have to say this Pod Friends might set a record in that it is one of the shortest Pod Friends episodes by a few minutes. But
wow.
It's one of the shortest. No, Maryanne, I know you're trying. No, I know.
I'm not gonna pad the time. I'm not like Shannon Gus with her podcast trying to pad the time to not become a record.
Oh my God, the feud between you and Shannon, it goes on. It's
always
happening. It's beautiful. We love Shannon.
Do we?
And
yeah, we do.
I just have to say, she should have chosen you as her winner pick. And I know that she knows that. And
it's all good. Flop era Shannon. In her flop era.
Flop era Shannon. No, stop us. I need to defend Shannon. No, Maryanne, you're wrong. I'm going to end this podcast in defense of Shannon Gus. Shout out to
Pick your
Shannon.
side, Matt. The line has been drawn.
Oh, I know. I have to pick Shannon's side. But low key, like you're on my side, especially with Buck. We got it. But I have to ask I ask one question, and actually I asked this to Shannon when she was on Pod Friends, and I'll ask you, and I ask everybody, Maryanne, if your life were a book or documentary, what would the title be and why?
What would the title be and why? I believe that the title of my book would be Life is a Roller Coaster.
Ooh.
And
yes.
Why? Because it is. Where it's like, because especially if you're like me and you're a thrill seeker, but you're like a reluctant thrill seeker where you love the thrills, but you get terrified of it. There's always that moment. There's the highs, there's the lows, there's the moment where you're terrified and you're like, why did I choose to do this? Why am I doing this? Like, should I really be doing this? Like, no, then immediately after the why am I doing this? Then the fear of doing that. There's that, oh my gosh, I'm so happy that I did this. And then after then, it's getting off the roller coaster, then going back after a couple of years and then going through that process again and then being like, well, I did it last time, but maybe this time I shouldn't have done it. Maybe I should have. And just going through that experiences of like the highs and the lows and still enjoying the ride, whether you were scared about going or not, or whether it's not. That's what my story is, the book.
Wow. That's beautiful. And honestly, it reminds me, I haven't been on a roller coaster in a while, so maybe I need to go figure that out and do that. But Maryanne, just as we wrap up, I want to give you the space to share any, hopefully not final words, but any words for the listeners, for anyone who's tuned in, for the RHAP as a podcast community. The floor is yours.
Of course. Not that many words to say. I feel like we've covered a lot of it, but the words are keep being kind, keep being you. It's like, remember that we live in the present, but all we have, a lot of the things we have are our memories. And then it's so much nicer to have a memory of like, oh yeah, I did do this, rather than the memory of like, I should have done this.
Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to this episode of Pod Friends featuring Maryanne. And now, as we're fresh off this episode, I want to ask you to do one thing in particular first and foremost, and it's to leave a voicemail. And you could do that at speakpipe.com/podfriends, which is a link that you could find in the show notes, the show description. But again, I would love for you to leave a voicemail with your thoughts, what resonated from Maryanne, thoughts on Pod Friends in general, thoughts on me in general. I don't know, maybe not, but speakpipe.com/podfriends is where I'd love to hear from you about how this resonates, what jumps out, what's meaningful to you in the conversation with Maryanne. And I don't want you to underestimate how much I want to hear from you. Yeah, you're looking at your podcast. Yes, it's still going. I want to hear from you with what you think, how you're feeling. I think sometimes it's easy to take for granted that these podcasts, we don't always hear from people. And I would love to hear from you with your thoughts, what resonates, what you relate with, what you learned, all that stuff, all that goodness. So leave a voicemail, send an email, podfriends@rhapasawebsite.com. Social media, I'm at MattScottGW, and you can follow me there for all the latest, including more about my podcast, The Wrestling Wrap Up, with the one and only Mari Forth at Mari Talks Too Much, 2 like the number 2, where we talk about pro wrestling and make it fun. And, again, last but not least, please subscribe to the podcast. Rob has a website.com/podfriendsfeed. Would really love those subscriptions to keep the lights on. So again, subscribe. And last but not least, thanks so much to Rob Sesternino. Thank you to Scott St. Pierre, Sam Moore, everyone behind the scenes. I won't go through all of the names, but you know who you are. Thank you for, again, helping bring this to life. And thank you to all of you for listening to making it to this point. It really does mean a lot to me, and I love to hear from you sincerely, just as that extra motivation to keep going with this show. But last but not least, as I say at the end of each and every one of my Pod Friends episodes, thank you. Like, sincerely, I do mean this. This isn't just a line. I want to thank you for being a pod friend, for being here, for showing support, for showing love, for joining me on this journey, the Pod Friends season to come, which is going to be a great one. And again, thank you for being a pod friend.